6 people. There are nearly 10 million people in the United States who identify as American Indian or Alaska Native. Last year, 6 of them got PhDs in engineering. Not 6%, 6 people. When I was a professor at the University of Michigan, I had a colleague named Phil Deloria. Phil wrote an awesome book. It's about how people don't expect to see natives as early adopters of technology in sports or in entertainment. He could just as well have focused on technology creation. That's a place that people don't expect to see natives. There are nearly 390 engineering deans in the country. I'm an enrolled member of the Delaware Tribe of Indians, and I am the first Native American dean of a College of Engineering. Talk about an Indian in an unexpected place. The value of diversity is well known. Diverse teams are more innovative and more productive. Research shows that the team achievement depends more on the diversity of the team than on the abilities of the individual team members. If people of color participated in science, technology, engineering, and math at the same rates as everybody else, the GDP would grow by an estimated $2 trillion. There are moral and ethical reasons for diversity as well. Natives are underrepresented in STEM and in higher education. Those 10 million people who self-report as Native corresponds to 2.9% of the US population. 0.4% of bachelor's degrees in the US went to Natives. 0.3% in engineering. Not 3%, 0.3%. The history that's taught in schools is mostly wrong or incomplete with regard to Natives. You might not know that the US broke every treaty it made with Native tribes. You might not know that Declaration of Independence calls us savages. You might not know that Natives were not US citizens until the Indian Citizenship Act passed in 1924, and even then, state laws in many states prevented Natives from voting until after World War II. You might not know the US had a policy of termination and relocation that was focused on destroying tribal sovereignty and forcing assimilation. And you might not know about Indian boarding schools. Kill the Indian, save the man was a motto of the founder and superintendent of the Carlisle Indian School. Take Native children from their parents, ship them off to boarding school, and erase their culture and force assimilation. Sometimes they literally killed the Indian. This cemetery is on the Carlisle campus. There are nearly 200 Native children buried there. Abuse and murder of Native kids was rampant. As an educator, I am appalled. As a parent, I can't imagine what that would be like. I want the world to be better for my daughter, for everybody. This isn't just about that 7th Native student who doesn't get an engineering PhD. It's about what we all lose by not getting that 7th or 700th Indigenous engineer. It's what we fail to learn in STEM if we don't tap into Indigenous genius. I picked just 4 things that STEM could learn from. The first is relationships among things. The Eurocentric approach to science is to isolate things and study them in isolation. The Indigenous approach is to focus on the relationships. Medical sciences, the isolation approach, has led to many, quote, cures to diseases such as cancer that worked in petri dishes but did not work in animal models or in humans. Yeah, you have to start someplace, but you also need to keep the important pieces. This is an example of what's known as the three sisters. You plant corn, beans, and squash together, and all three thrive. The corn grows first, provides structure for the bean vine to grow up. Beans provide nitrogen that fertilizes the soil. Squash grows last and provides ground cover that prevents weeds. Compare that to Eurocentric agriculture, plant one crop, use a bunch of chemicals and fertilizers to get it to grow. There are other examples, but just a couple I'll point out are salmon fishery management and cultural burns for forest. Those are examples where indigenous folks did it better, and Western science is still catching up. For real cures, not just for people, but for the planet, we need to dwell in the relationships among things. The second is long-term thinking. The wisdom of the seventh generation requires that we consider the impact of any action or decision today on 7 generations into the future, not just the next quarter. Too often, the Western approach doesn't think long-term. Sometimes it's intentional, such as focusing on short-term gains at the expense of long-term sustainability. Other times it's more nuanced. With the planet warming, it's never been more obviously important to think long-term. The next is meaning and purpose. STEM asks, how does it work and what use is it? Traditionally, indigenous folks often ask those too, but we always ask, what does it mean? Indigenous people don't view the world as here for us to consume it. We're part of it. The universe and everything in it is related to humans, and we treat our relatives with respect, and we learn from them. Every being has its own unique gifts and its own story, and it's important that we use those gifts well. German engineers in the 1930s figured out how to make really advanced tanks, but not enough of them sufficiently considered the purpose and meaning of those tanks. The fourth is balance. This is a medicine wheel. It's common to many tribes. The 4 colors correspond to several different interpretations, 4 directions, the 4 sacred medicines, or the 4 aspects of universal existence: mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. But in all of those interpretations, it represents balance in our lives. We need balance to live in a good way. An example from physiology is salt. We need it to live. Without it, sodium channels that are essential to cell function won't work. But if we consume too much, we die. We need balance. Let me be clear. I am not saying we need STEM to save indigenous people. I'm saying we need indigenous STEM to make the world better. So if we understand the value of diversity, why hasn't STEM become more diverse? It's not a pipeline problem. That's not even the right terminology. We're talking about people, not oil. The idea that underrepresented people are in some way deficient and just need to try harder or change is misguided and ineffective. STEM, higher education, and industry weren't built for people of color. We need systemic change that recognizes the assets they bring to the discipline. STEM needs to center indigenous ways of thinking. We can do that by applying those 4 traditional lessons we just talked about. Here are 4 ways. It needs to be a purpose-driven discipline. Be an engineer to solve important problems. Research shows the reason people of color leave STEM isn't because they can't do the technical work. It's because they don't see the impact on the things they care about. Industry struggles to recruit and retain talent. Younger people place much more importance on meaningful work. Becoming more purpose-driven benefits everyone, not just indigenous folks. We need a better way of understanding our lives. The basic idea to work for a bunch of money and then die, and maybe it worked for the Queen of Spain back in the colonizing era, but it doesn't really work for anybody else. We want to work for things we care about that we'll be glad that we accomplished. Yes, we need high-paying professions, but there has to be meaning associated with it. the potlatch or giveaway traditions that are common to many tribes reflect the thinking that the importance of wealth is what we can do for others, not accumulating things for ourselves. We'd all do well to remember the story of the businessman and the fisherman. A traveling businessman came across a local fisherman who had just caught a bunch of big fish. He said, "Is the fishing usually that good?" Fisherman said, "Yes." Businessman said, "Oh, do you go every day?" Fisherman said, "Well, I go most weekdays in the morning." Businessman said, "Oh, you should fish more, stay out longer, sell your fish. You could grow your business." Fisherman said, "Why?" Businessman said, "Well, you could get an office, a sales department, marketing team, finance department. You worked really hard, and in many years you'd have a lot of employees and a bunch of boats. You worked hard for 15 or 20 years, you'd be rich." Fisherman said, "Oh, how rich?" Businessman said, "Well, rich enough you could afford to go fishing every morning." Clearly, we need room and tech for different notions of wealth and impact. We need multiple pathways into the discipline. We discourage people too early. Your algebra scores when you're 12 years old aren't necessarily the best predictor of success in STEM. People with head starts are rewarded. Others are told, STEM's not for you. People mature at different rates. Astronomer William Herschel started as a musician. Didn't even look at stars till he was in his late 30s. Mathematician Eugene Earhart graduated from high school when he was 22 years old. Got his PhD when he was 60. Earhart polynomials are still useful and impactful today. Recent research has shown that the GRE is not an effective predictor of successful completion of PhD programs. It's a better measure of privilege, so much so that all top 20 life science PhD programs in the country stopped using it in the last 5 years. There might be a place for standardized tests, but it's more nuanced than previously thought. Yes, math and science are important to engineering, but the real goal is creative solutions to problems. We need room for exploration and experiential learning and education, and we need pathways that reflect long-term thinking and relationships into the discipline. The fourth is we need to keep humanity in STEM. This is an AI-generated picture of AI. Sure doesn't look like an Indigenous person. Turning people into machines isn't sustainable, and neither is directly competing with machines. AI is on the rise. It can do many things cheaper and faster. What will we need humans for? We need engineers who can solve human problems, not just math problems. Too often, innovation is limited because a discipline doesn't ask the right questions and doesn't work on the most important problems. We need to start design thinking earlier as a discipline. Indigenous folks have known all along that consuming the environment without understanding the relationships isn't sustainable. We need to think 7 generations ahead, and we need to keep humanity in STEM. We can do this. We can do it here. Oregon has 9 federally recognized tribes. Portland has a large urban Indian population. Systemic change is not about appropriation. Native folks are integral to this transformation. It's not just about more Native students and faculty, although that's a good outcome. It's about systemic change that makes STEM better, science and engineering better, technology better, can make the world better, not just for my daughter, but for everybody. We don't need STEM to save Indigenous people. We need Indigenous STEM to save the planet.